All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. Today we're going to talk about 6 lessons learned from a Kickstarter campaign prep. So by the time you listen to this, my campaign, the Black Turtle Co, will be live on Kickstarter. So go ahead, check it out, blackturtleco.com. It'll redirect you to the Kickstarter page. So today we'll talk about some 6 things I learned from the campaign prep in the past 5-6 months. It's been a little bit stressful, especially this past week, especially 2 days before launch. There's actually some big changes I might need to make. So we'll talk about a little bit about that today. But first, I haven't talked to Travis in 2 weeks, so we'll do some quick updates. So what are you up to, man?
I just went to New Media Expo last week. It was really cool. I had a lot of fun meeting a lot of different people from podcasting, the YouTube world, a couple different internet marketers, but I learned some cool things as well. So it was about 4 days, and I'll give one of the quick tips that I think could be really valuable to e-commerce. So just to let everyone know, New Media Expo focuses on podcasters and YouTubers. It's not really about e-commerce. But one of the things that I thought of would be a good carryover is Instagram video is something that no one's really using, and it's something that could be potentially really powerful. And they showed us a clip of quote unquote the fastest, what was it called? The fastest food, where they make food, like one of the shows where they make food, like cooking show. That's what it was, the fastest cooking show. And it was a 15-second cooking show. And Instagram videos can only be 15 seconds. So in the video, they just show like bread, mayo, this, and then whatever. And then I guess you can go to the website to watch the full video. And I started thinking I could do the same thing with my kind of how do you DIY your dance costume videos. I could show like my mom sitting there like, all right, now we're going to add rhinestones, and then, put in some cool special effects or whatever. But it's a good way to increase the virality of your content, I think.
All right, so for me, I was in Singapore last week. Shout out to Angela, Leighton, and Ahmed for meeting up. We just got some wine and talked about e-commerce a little bit last Sunday night in Singapore while I was doing my visa run. And so I'm back here in Vietnam, ready to launch the campaign, and kind of having some nervous breakdowns, but hey, what can we do? Right? Gotta launch. All right, so let's get into today's episode. So the first lesson, photography and media assets. So the first one, I picked this one because before I got into e-commerce, I always thought product photos were kind of easy to do. Like you look at like a brand, like in a magazine, like in GQ or whatever, and it looks so awesome. You think, oh yeah, I could just make my product look that good. But actually, no, there's actually a whole huge skill set that goes in that, and it's actually pretty fucking complicated because models are models for a reason. I realized that because if you get your friends to do photos, and it's not like your friends, can't look as good as a model. It's just that there's certain poses that a model knows and how to look in front of the camera that kind of make them, a model. And I think most people don't realize that because unless you do photography, the way you set up your shot, get someone to pose, like unless you're a good director yourself or you know what you want, it's really hard to kind of expect it to just come together. Just because you have a nice camera doesn't mean you'll get a nice shot, essentially.
Did you hire a model for the pictures?
No, I use some friends that have done some like freelance modeling before, but they're not like professional. By far. It was just people that have done some photo shoots here and there casually too. So I think part of it that kind of helped me was that I had saved a folder on my Dropbox throughout the past 2-3 months for shots that I like. Like if I go to like some e-commerce site and I like this photo, I'll just save it into my folder. I'll screenshot it. And then basically I'll have an inspiration folder where when I need a shot list, I can basically just copy what they're doing or at least get kind of inspiration.
And did you take the pictures or did you hire a photographer?
Yeah, so I started with a photographer first, and then it was kind of just like a friend helping out, but I realized what I really wanted, they weren't able to pull off. So one thing you'll realize is that with product photography, when you think photography, it's someone with a camera, but there's actually different skill sets within that. Like you say like baby photography, wedding photography, sports photography, product photography. There's different skill sets within this realm too. So if you take someone like sports photography, there's a lot of action shots. Someone like a basketball NBA guy, he's doing the slam dunk. Well, how do you catch the guy in the air? That's a much different skill set than say taking a picture of a MacBook in a cafe where something's a little more kind of artistic and things like that. And then you also have like landscape photography where you're taking a sunset, how do you get all the lighting right and get these cool reflections off the water? So I think product photography, one thing I realized is that, all right, if you're going to look for a photographer, find someone with relevant experience too. So for me, I had some friends that helped out, but in the end, the shots weren't really what I wanted. And one thing you realize is that the hit rate for photography is probably around like 50-1 from what I've heard from some friends. Like 60-1, 51 is good, which means that for every 60 shots you take, usually one will be like usable too, and that's kind of what I found too. So basically, on my campaign page, I have about 20 photos. So I took easily like 1,500, if not 2,000 photos, just to get these 20 that are usable.
So wait, you had some friends take some photos, but the actual ones you ended up using, did you take them, or how'd that happen?
So out of all my photos, I have about 20 photos. The ones used by friends were maybe like 2 or 3 photos, and the rest I took all myself. Just because if I was to ask a friend to take 1,000, 2,000 photos, it would take like 2 or 3 days of their time, and I didn't want to make them go through that trouble too. And it also goes to the next thing where you should plan your shots, because if you just expect to kind of randomly take a bunch of photos, you have a lot of experimentation to do. So for example, if you want, one of the pictures I took was with like the MacBook lying down in the sunlight with kind of the case in the front. And what happens is I took probably like 20 shots of that because I was moving the angles of the MacBook. Like you move it like half a degree, 1 degree here, a little angle here. This stuff takes a lot of experimentation too. And I think if you go and just think you're gonna just take 10 shots, that'll be fine. No, you're gonna need to take like 100 just to get like 2 or 3 that are usable.
Yeah, that's interesting. So how would you recommend planning your shots then? Just like writing it out on a piece of paper, or?
Yeah, I would say have an inspiration folder. Like I said earlier, just have a Dropbox folder where you have shots that you like, and then when you're gonna shoot, just kind of take a piece of paper, draw like a rectangle, and then kind of sketch it out on the sheet, because then you can tell your model or your friend like, hey, this is kind of what I want. Look at this picture. I want the sun to come in from this side. Your arm should be this straight, this crooked. Kind of the setting is like in a cafe, be relaxed, things like that too. It makes it easier for everyone if you know what you're actually shooting to.
Makes sense.
All right, so number 2, video. So video is kind of the same thing too. So instead of the 50-to-1 ballpark rate, it's probably more like 30-to-1, and it depends on how complicated your footage is too. So a lot of the footage on my video, if you go to the page, is slider shots. So a slider is something you put on the tripod, and then it gives this vertical left to right sliding effect for the camera. Basically, it just moves the camera left to right, and I think it adds a lot of dynamic kind of movement to the shot. And so this stuff is pretty vanilla because your subject isn't moving. Whereas if you're doing like a lot of dialogue with 2 people talking to each other, or like a crowd, like that takes a lot more investment in the resources too. So if you're just doing like a talking head video, I'm sure you've done this before too, right? It's kind of weird to see yourself on the camera or on a podcast. So you're gonna need to do at least, a minimum 5 takes, if not more like 10, to get things right too. So for my video, the product shots are quite easy because there's no sound. There's just a song in the background. But for the one when I was talking in the camera, I shot probably 20 minutes of video, and the actual video is only like 1 minute in terms of like me in front of the camera too. So if you're doing video, certainly get ready to shoot a lot and have a lot of pauses, errors, things like that. And I found one thing that's helpful is if you're shooting video and you stutter and you want to start over, just plow through it. Like don't pause the camera and then redo it. Just keep going and until you plow through it, and then you can always go back and delete the ones that you don't need to.
Yeah, that makes sense. Actually, I recently got one of those, like a little infrared sensor thing that I can push the button and it starts and stops. I found that to be kind of helpful because I don't know, I kind of like the reset idea of like, all right, I'm gonna record myself. If I mess up, just push the button, do it again. But I see what you're saying. Sometimes you can just edit out the parts that you messed up on.
Yeah, and I got that too, because if you're doing it yourself, you're not gonna run all the time to the camera, press record, and then run back, because you're gonna lose focus or whatever too. So I mean, those things are really cheap. They're only like $8 too.
I think one of the best things I bought recently, I took a bunch of photos for my podcast, the other podcast, and without that, it would have been really hard because I would have had to ask a friend, hey, can you take all these photos for me? By the way, I'm going to try out like 100 different poses, to see what works. But with that button, it's just like I click it, change until I find something I halfway like.
All right. And just going on to video, one thing also to do is to plan your shots, in the sense that what they have in video is called a storyboard, where basically like photography, you have a single frame, but for video, you have maybe like, 10 to 15 frames as the video progresses. So if you're just talking in front of a camera, it's really easy. Do you stand on the middle, on the left, the right? But if you're having like a lot of action where you're doing talking, a lot of product videos, you should at least have an idea of what you're going to shoot, because if you're just shooting random video, you never know if it's going to be usable too. And if it's the 30-to-1 usable ratio, you're going to be shooting a lot of stuff, shotgun approach. It's going to waste a lot of time and resources too. So like I said earlier, one thing to do is to save an inspiration folder. So basically bookmark product videos that you like, and then you can always just kind of take inspiration from them and kind of copy what they're doing.
Quick question for you. It's kind of backtracking a little bit, but you said you had some friends doing the modeling. Did you pay them, or did you just kind of like buy them lunch, or how do you deal with that?
So if you look at like social media now, a lot of people don't have good photos for like their Facebook page or LinkedIn. So I was just saying, hey, can you pose for a few shots for me, and then I'll do a few headshots for you for like your social media profiles, and you can have these for like a resume or whatever press kit you want to. So basically, it's like the reciprocity thing in like spotlight marketing. What can you give someone first? So basically, I was saying, hey, I'll just do a couple shots for you. I'll do like a video for you if you want it, and then you just help me pose. So it was mutual trade.
Okay. And how long did the model actually end up? Because you said you had to take like 1,500 photos. So was the model there for like?
Yeah. I used 2 guys and a girl. Each one we spent about 5 hours each, maybe. And the thing that I also have them do is bring like 2 or 3 outfits, because if you have the same outfit in different locations, people can see that they're wearing the same shirt, right? So the quickest way to do it is to have like 2 pairs of pants, 3 shirts, and then they can just alternate between this combo as you go to different places too. And so when you plan your shot list, it also helps to have a location that's close by. So you've been to Vietnam here, right? So one, you'd been to my house. We did one at the balcony, and then one at the Starbucks at that roundabout, and then the other one kind of near at the street corner, and then one was downstairs at the Starbucks, one was outside. So there was like kind of 4 different locations within like a 100-meter vicinity of my house here. So it was really, we were able to really quickly.
Oh, okay, cool.
So if you got to like go to like go to a dance studio, and you got to go outside somewhere, like you got to like a lot of travel involved, then it becomes much more complicated too. So it goes back to like planning your shots and figuring out where exactly you need to be, so that when you get there, you just kind of bang it out, and then you kind of do it from there. And the other thing is too, you want to use natural daylight for both video and pictures. If you really, natural light from the sun looks better than anything else. I realize, even like in a studio, like I guess you can Photoshop it a little bit. I'm not that good at it, but just natural light looks much better. And usually I found the best to be around like either 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. or like 3:30 to like 6 p.m. in the afternoon. And after that, it gets too dark.
Yeah.
All right, so number 3, press and momentum. So one thing I realized is that people that have these blogs, most of them want to see momentum first. So it's kind of a catch-22, where if you didn't launch yet, they won't post for you, or it'll be really hard for them to say, hey, can you post on this date when I launch? Because they have their own editorial calendar, and as someone who's new to this, it's kind of hard to do that if you don't have a relationship to in some ways. So it seems like no one wants to promote a campaign that has no momentum either too. So I think the first week seems to be up to you to kind of drum up some early support, and then you can kind of snowball effect from there. Still figuring this out. We'll see in this week and the next 2 weeks. I have some guest posts that are going out and things like that. So
how many guest posts do you have going out?
6.
Wow.
On like these different sites.
And so you wrote them. What topic? Just about like your product, or about all kinds of different things?
Yeah, so it depends on what outlets. So there's one on Reddit, kind of like in the subreddit Entrepreneur, and then there's a subreddit Crowdfunding, and then there's these 2 finance blogs I used to write for. So it's a little different. I'm not talking about like business there. I'm talking more like, oh, here's what I'm doing since leaving the business, things like that. And then obviously DC, e-commerce field will probably have one in there too. Kind of just more like on like a behind the scenes side. Like Tropical MBA, these blogs, they're not really the right target in the sense. Like it'd be cool to have the exposure, but I don't think all exposure is equal to. And to be honest, I think nomads are kind of cheap, so they're not really well.
What about getting on like some podcast? Have you thought about, like, I bet you the Tropical MBA, I bet you could get on that podcast. I think Dan would hook you up.
Yeah. But the thing is, like I said, you got to have some momentum first too. So I'll probably wait till like the first week, second week, and then do that. So number 4, conversion. So this part is a little bit tricky, because once you launch a campaign, you can't change your price. So if you price too high or too low, you're either leaving money on the table or you're pricing too many people out. And this is kind of something that I've been kind of worried about, because some people are saying, hey, I'd pay $200 for your sleeve, whereas other people are saying, oh man, like $130 or whatever is
I'd give you a solid $10 at least. At least. Yeah.
Wow, that's it. At least, huh?
Yeah, at least.
Yeah. So this is a little stressful, because if you price too low or price too high, like there's good and bad, right? So by the time you hear this, you'll go to the site, you'll see what the final price is but you'll have to go there to find out, because I'll leave it as an Easter egg for you.
Oh, so are you still in flux, or do you know what it's going to be, but just an Easter egg?
I think I know what it's going to be, but I'm just going to keep it in.
Gotcha.
So I guess number 5, pricing on part 2, is that one thing is that the pricing on a crowdfunding site isn't always the right retail price. And crowdfunding is a little bit tricky because you're asking people to help you before you've made something. So there is some kind of discount you want to give them for being an early supporter. But then how much do you give it versus retail? And there's a kind of a sweet spot to figure out. In some cases, I've seen they actually charge more on Kickstarter than on retail. And that's because some of the products they're making have more R&D costs. So in the sense that, say you're making a drone or whatever, and the initial first 100 units are going to be really expensive to make. But once you can put in an order of like 5,000, it suddenly becomes lower too. So there's also the thing where, if your early backers are giving you money, you don't want to screw them either with a higher price too. So I guess pricing is a really sensitive thing you got to figure out too. So whether you want to charge, give the people the right discount, but how do you make sure everything can still carry through with the right margins and pricing too?
I mean, obviously, I don't know a lot about this, but my initial thought is Kickstarter price should be higher than retail for the reasons you said of at first, your first 100 units are more expensive. And because without a doubt, like if I were to do something, the first 100 units are going to be, let's say, $25. But then once I get scale, it should be cheaper. Plus, on top of that, to me, Kickstarter seems like it's kind of the initial adopter type people. It's the people that would go out and buy the PlayStation or the iPhone 6S or whatever it is right when it comes out, and they don't care what the price is. But there's people like me that I'm like, I'll wait 6 months, a year when it's on discount. That being said, you're right. It is kind of sucky to screw over your Kickstarter fans, but it seems like from a business standpoint, my personal opinion is price it higher on Kickstarter.
It really depends on what you're making too. Like if you're making, like, I don't know, like a bamboo case versus a drone, there's very different economics between the R&D costs involved to develop something like this too. So I wouldn't say there's like a right rule either, but it does take a lot of process to kind of figure out where the sweet spot is. And the tricky thing is too is that once you set the price, you can't change it too. So either that you have to see if your campaign works or it doesn't, and then go again, or just kind of adjust from there, have different tiers and kind of go from there. But I think one thing that's useful is that you can have early bird tiers and kind of like a late on time tiers to kind of get some different price sensitivity data too. So you can have one that's like, super early bird 100 units, early bird another 100 units, and then the regular price at whatever, and then just have different price points to kind of.
Yeah, that's smart.
All right, so number 6 would be manufacturing. So this kind of goes into the last tangent in pricing. I was talking to Vincent over at Bomber Barrel the other day, and he was saying the right way to negotiate, which kind of I screwed upon, is to actually. So when you're starting out, he was saying it's really hard to know what your order visibility is, right? If you're starting a Kickstarter, you don't know what you're going to get. How do you avoid paying a high price for a low quantity? So basically, he was saying the way to do this is that anytime you ask for a quote, especially in Asia, always ask for 1,000 minimum, just because anything under 1,000, it's kind of a joke for a supplier. So by quoting 1,000, what you're doing is you're getting a real quote in the sense that it's actually a manufacturing average price, not like, because if you order 100, they're going to charge you a lot for that unit and you won't know what the actual price is. So you ask them for 1,000 and then you get that kind of ballpark number. You say, we're sourcing for a company that has mass distribution in the US and Europe, which is kind of true. Kickstarter is kind of like that. But what we have to do first, we need to get 50 to 100 units at a sample. So basically, you're getting the quote at 1,000, but you're getting the samples made at that quote price. Only for 10% of the orders. So instead of going to the supplier saying I want 100 units, you're saying I want 1,000 units, but I only want 100 units first as a sample. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. So did you do that or did you not do that?
No, I didn't do that. So which is kind of what I messed up on. So basically by doing that, then you can say, hey, our US and UK team, they need 3 to 4 weeks to do quality checks and approve the product. So once what we want to do is we want to get these 100 units at the price of 1,000. And if we approve it, we'll move forward with the rest of the 900, basically. And they call this contingent upon first order, essentially. So basically, this also gives you an out, too, where if you can only move 100 units on a campaign or whatever, and you don't have any more, you could just say, hey, it didn't pass our quality control checks, and, see ya.
How many units do you plan on selling? Like, what's your goal?
So my goal will be 20,000, and that's around probably 150 to 200 units, ballpark range. So 150 to 250. But the thing is, you don't know until you launch too. That's the tricky thing with a crowdfunding campaign too. So he was saying this way basically gives you an out, essentially, when you get 100 units at a quote sample, even though it's actually just a small MOQ. And also it forces the supplier to show their hand first, rather than you saying I can't order as much. I don't know if that makes sense. So basically, you're forcing them to show their hand with the 1,000 unit quote. Then you know what you can play with from there too, instead of starting high and making them go low. So the way I did it was that I thought, all right, I would just go with a low quantity, and then if I have the actual orders, then I would go back and leverage. But it turns out it's actually the other way around to have a better effect. So
are you going to get a new supplier, or what are you going to do?
I have the sample pretty much good to go, so it's not that hard to find a new supplier from here. It's just a matter of giving, maybe even mailing this sample to them and being like, hey, this is what I want, just copy this thing. And then they're really good at copying stuff in China, right? So basically take things from there. So I get one thing to also do is I'll probably just shop around in the next 2 weeks or so, because the campaign is pretty much set, right? Like that's like the copy, like you saw the preview page, it's pretty much good to go. By the time you hear this, it's probably live. And so from there, it's just a matter of finding someone to actually get it at a lower price with the same quality, which seems kind of easy to find. There's a lot of leather suppliers there in China. So I think the way I negotiated starting out was just kind of wrong too. So
I guess it's probably too late. My first thought was like, I wonder if you could kind of trick them into being like, hey, how much actually, like, oh, we want to do 1,000, and then like kind of put that on the table for a little while, and then be like, you know what, actually, we're just going to do the first 100. I guess then they'd want to give you the price that they already quoted you.
Yeah, so I did ask them for 1,000, but it is the weekend now when we're recording this, so I probably won't see until Monday. But I've just, in the meantime, I'm asking like 10 other people for 1,000 just to get a better idea of what it should be like. So, and we'll see how that goes too. I mean, the good thing is that the sample's ready, and then you just got to price it at a point where it could still make sense at different suppliers too. So I think I have a really good number.
Wait a minute. One question I'm really curious is your Thunderclap. How's that doing?
We have 166. So I haven't pushed it because I've been busy with photos and stuff. So I think I'm just gonna call it.
You told me 200.
I think I'm just gonna call it at 166. I think.
Oh,
but I'm gonna do a second one though on the last week of the campaign.
Second Thunderclap?
The second one's only gonna be for backers. So people that have pledged on the Kickstarter, I'm gonna ask them to join the second one for the last week. So this will be a completely different crowd, because like I think the way to see it is like a snowball. How do you keep pushing the snowball bigger and bigger? So if people want someone, because people always ask people to share the campaign on social media, so you might as well get someone who's giving you money to be like, hey, thank you for your support. By the way, we're going to do another big push in the last week. Since you're supporting this campaign, would you like to join us? And here's the link. So that's kind of it for this episode. 6 lessons learned from a Kickstarter campaign prep. Probably a lot more after we're live. So by the time you hear this, check it out. blackturtleco.com. If it's not live yet, you hear this on Sunday, it'll be there Monday or Tuesday.
Cool. Thanks, guys.